Welcome back to the Malt Miller YouTube channel. We are back with another brew with us, although it's kind of a brew with you.
Yeah, we are in Haringey and we've come today to see Jacob from Jiddler'S Tipple.
Whilst you might be expecting us to be in a brewery, we're not. We're at Jacob's house here in the borough of Haringey. Jacob, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Tell us about Jiddler'S Tipple.
So if you haven't heard about Jiddler'S Tipple before, based in North London, we make really accessible, inclusive and socially responsible beers. The core range are all 3.8%. They're gluten-free, they're vegan, they're made with 40% solar power, and we also offset 25% more carbon than we produce. But above all else, I think, and I hope they are, super delicious. And to top it all off, they're all wrapped in my favourite vintage shirt patterns.
The branding is absolutely incredible, and the story behind the branding I really want to get into. Where did we all start?
So, to start at the beginning, my love of homebrewing has just come out of a general love of culinary delights. Originally, I've been cooking from the age of 9 or 10.
Yeah.
Loved having people round for meals, cooking up a big feast, love sharing delicious food and drink with people.
So many brewers are also into the culinary arts as well. It goes hand in hand.
Absolutely. And I, like many good things, started in a pub. I met somebody who was homebrewing at a shared space in Bermondsey, Brew, and they told me a little bit about it. And actually, I'd just been made redundant from my last job.
Okay.
And I was figuring out a little bit what I wanted to do next, and I had a bit of time on my hands, so I thought, you know what, let's give this a go. And I went along and spent about 3 months at Brew, brewing in a community of brewers, and learning the sort of tricks of the trade and building foundations of knowledge. And it was, I guess, most importantly, because you're brewing in a room with 6 to 8 people all brewing at the same time, you can find out what to do, but very importantly, what not to do.
Let's not miss out on something that's really important. So your educational background before that.
Yes, so I'll wet my whistle for a sec. Yeah, so another thing, I guess, which sparked a love of homebrewing so quickly was that I did mechanical engineering at uni. Obviously very science-based, and when I discovered how technical homebrewing is and how it married the creative side of culinary arts, it just immediately lit a passion inside of me, and I just realised the more I was understanding about brewing, the more I knew I didn't know. So it was just a thirst to just learn more and more and more.
The gears were set in motion, yeah?
Exactly.
So you're brewing with mates at Brew, which was an awesome facility, and you're having a brilliant time brewing. Then you've started homebrewing actually at home?
Yeah, so basically I was there 3 or 4 months, got the foundations in and realised that I wanted to be closer to the process and do this on a continued basis. So I looked into what kit you might need to do at home. I bought a commercial stove, a big kind of 35 litre pot, and basically set up a brew in the bag system
in your kitchen.
I wasn't allowed to do it in the kitchen because I think I did it once. I did it once in there, and there was a boil over, and that's probably an hour cleaning. So I did it in the garden, as we are now. Yeah. Best place to brew. And I bought some, got some second-hand fridges of Gumtree, some plastic fermenters. Basically started off brewing at home, and that's why I sort of learnt about the importance of temperature control. Actually, the reason I stopped at Brew was because I wanted to brew lagers, and the fermentation room was only at consistent 20, so I wanted to experiment with different yeasts.
So we're looking at like classic homebrew journey.
Yes.
Yeah. It takes hold.
Yeah, realising about all the different variables there are, malt, hops, yeast, fermentation temperature, all these different variables really started exciting me. So I took it in-house. I say in-house, in-home, and also, yeah, was using a kind of a ladder to suspend the mash sack over the pot and things like that. But yeah, really basically took hold of it and then wanted to learn more and more about how the process worked. So joined a few local homebrew clubs like London Amateur Brewers Lab based in Bermondsey, and there's another one in Brixton. And just started really throwing myself into the beer scene.
We first met at one of the BrewCon events. You'd already started to become like a face on the homebrew scene, but then you're starting to take it even further.
Yeah, so I mean, it's worth saying as well that working with homebrews was probably where I learnt some of the most I've ever learnt in brewing, because some of those guys had been brewing for like 50 years, were just so knowledgeable about the product. And again, like I said before, learning about what to do, but also what not to do. Yeah. And they were getting involved in judging, and I thought this is a great way of expanding my knowledge. So I took part in the beer judge certification program training, and then started going to homebrew competitions, started as a steward and then went into judging. Yeah. And actually that's the point at which I really started to hone in my smell and my taste and sort of general olfactory system. And just because when you're judging, 10 different Pilsners or 10 different pale ales or 10 different Belgian beers, which are the same style next to each other, you really start to pick up the nuance in them and be able to flag if there's any potential off flavors there as well. And then also at the end when they're doing the best of show, getting to try some of those. I think the best beers I've ever tried have been at those homebrew competitions, because I think they're some of the biggest stinkers I've ever tried as well, because there's obviously a big range.
But fast,
but the quality is the top level is absolutely amazing.
Jacob, you've expanded your brand so much that you've now got beers in countless of the top supermarkets, but you've not actually done that in the same way as many other breweries. We really need to know about it.
Yeah, so I had really been enjoying homebrewing, as I said. Love sharing good food and drink with people. At this point I was brewing at home. I'd got some kegs and was having beer at parties, so I was not only providing delicious kind of barbecue food, but I was also starting to provide delicious beers as well. My level of brewing had improved significantly, and people started saying, hey, this beer's pretty good. I'd always wanted to start a food and drink brand, and an idea started forming in my head. Like a lot of homebrewers, I started with quite high ABV things. 7 to 8% IPAs and Belgian beers and things like that. And being honest, at the parties I was having, everyone was pretty wasted by about 8 o'clock.
That's going to happen,
so I started playing with getting as much flavour into the beer as I could, but dropping the ABV down to below 4%. And the beers started tasting really good, and I noticed at the same time when I was out and about drinking beers that at that time there was a distinct lack of really tasty, well balanced, lower ABV beers.
So the business part of your brain started kicking in.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I was playing with a few different ways of how I could start the business, and costing it out. Luckily, the job I had at that time, I was working for a company who actually helped with logistics of food and drink brands. So I'd had a window into how other food and drink brands grow, and a lot of them there were outsourcing their production. And so I modelled out opening my own little brewery, maybe with a 200 or 500 litre kit at the start. And I also started talking to breweries and seeing if I came to them with a recipe, how much it would cost. And it worked out that buying the ingredients, the packaging, the bottle and everything, and making it myself actually worked out on a smaller scale, slightly more expensive than if I went to a brewery and brewed a 1,000 litre batch. So immediately at that point I was like, well, given I'm quite short on time because I've got a full-time job, that probably makes more sense at this stage. And on top of it being cheaper, I'm not actually spending the time brewing it as well. So that frees up my time to help grow the business and start it at that crucial stage.
Massively important. If you're working in it, you can't be expanding it and building your brand, which you've been absolutely spot on, because the actual individual branding and the flamboyance of your brand that's obviously led by you, it's been absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I guess it's worth going back a step to the design of the cans and the brand, at the same time as working out what recipe I was going to use and how I was going to get it brewed. I was also thinking about what to clothe the beers in, and I've always loved jazzy patterns and vintage clothing, and so it kind of clicked. I've got a wardrobe full of awesome designs. And one of my good friends, Peter's a designer, and we were brainstorming and we were just talking about this idea of dressing the beers in vintage clothing. And for that note, the glassware as well, which came a bit later. But yeah, so it didn't take me long to look through my wardrobe and find one of my favourite party shirts, and that became the face of Everyday Pale Ale. And as I've grown the brand, I guess, as you say, that kind of flamboyance and eye-catchiness has played into that. But before I did this, I actually did a few different sales jobs. Some of that was I was selling encyclopedias door to door in America, in Colorado.
Okay.
So my approach to sales has always been, you have to be knocking on doors or, catching people's attention. And those shows are a perfect example. Like, you're there with hundreds of breweries and they're all making delicious beer, and like, you've got to find a way to stand out.
You've certainly done that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's called peacocking. But yeah, I try and make the brand and the cans and Jiddler'S Tipple peacock as much as possible, because in a very competitive market, you have to stick in people's minds over the other brands. Otherwise, that's the difference between growing or failing, basically.
So you've got branding ideas, you've got marketing ideas, but I'm sure getting the actual business off the ground was a massive amount of hard graft.
Yeah, so the first few years was certainly a lot of learnings the hard way. I had the can and brand design down. I had an initial recipe idea, which was my Everyday Pale Ale, and I decided on a way of producing the beer as well. And the next thing was just to brew a batch of beer, basically. So I took 3 grand savings and went to a brewery and got them to brew an 800 litre batch of beer. And then just got the beer out there. I went to farmers markets. I started dropping samples off in the local area. From there, it kind of grew organically, and I started to get a few listings in terms of taps and retailers. And it's worth mentioning at this point, I was still working a full-time job. So
right, okay.
This was my 5 to 9. And then, actually, interestingly enough, there was a bit of a spanner in the works, because I started the business in October 2019. Yeah. And then about 3 months later, wham, you've got COVID hits.
Actually, just drilling into that a little bit. So at that point, you had cans of beer. The whole brewery world went small pack.
Yes.
So was that a right situation for you, because you actually had beer in small pack at that point?
To be honest, it was an advantage for me, because it was much easier for me to pivot than maybe it was for a more established brewery who had set their strategy out as, we are doing keg beer, which we're focusing on trade. Luckily, the brewery I was brewing the beer with had a canning line, so they didn't have to start. A lot of breweries were scrabbling for these mobile canning facilities. They had a canning line already, so I just had to switch all of my brewing production into small pack instead of kegs. So, which in some ways meant I was at a bit of an advantage. I tell you, overnight I set up a website and started selling beers.
You make it sound so simple.
It was certainly a bit of a pivot, but definitely a lot more easy to pivot when you're a one-man band.
Yeah, I can understand.
Dozens or hundreds of people.
So fast forward to today, you're selling a whole bunch of beer through supermarkets. In fact, we're actually brewing one of those now. How did you get there?
Yeah, so I had my first beer. I'd gone out, I'd got some feedback. The feedback was good, and I'd always said, you know, it's worst comes to worst. I brewed a batch of beer. If it sells, I'll buy more. If it doesn't, I'm sure I can find some friends and family who'll help me drink a batch of beer. Over the next 2.5 years, I fleshed out the core range. I released a new beer every 8 weeks, so everyday pale ale. Then I thought the next logical beer was a lager, so I did bog standard lager. Then after that, I did a West Coast IPA, another IPA, and then after that, Juicy Chug, which is a hazy apricot IPA. And once I got to 2022, I actually got the business to a point where I could quit my other job and go full time.
So it's starting to click.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's about getting proof of concept.
Yeah.
Actually, the first real point at which I thought maybe this can actually work is I won the Brew London competition, the Brew London Accelerator.
Yeah.
And through that, I got a free stand at Brew London. And there were 5 different brands, and the person who sold the most at Brew London then won the whole accelerator and got coaching from 4 of the people who run the event for the following year.
Right.
And when I won that, I was like, you know what, this business actually has legs. And it was that point I thought, right, time to quit my job and really give this a go. And then the last 2 years have really been spent doing specials and collaborations with other breweries and just getting the brand out there as much as possible, to the point where I've done 2 or 3 events every single year. Luckily, through politely, persistently poking the right people over a long enough period of time, I've managed to get noticed by some of the bigger retailers, Ocado, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Whole Foods, and the special sauce which came about and was in my head kind of 5 years ago seems to be paying off, which is obviously a really nice feeling, but it's not come with a little bit of graft, that's for sure.
Jacob, we're having great fun here homebrewing. This beer is going to be available in a supermarket. Tell us a bit about the beer.
So this is Nimbus. It started actually out of training, the beer judge certification program training course, which myself and another homebrewer ran last year.
Yeah.
And one of the 10 sessions we ran were looking at IPAs and New England IPAs, and I had this beer, Great Notion, it was by Great Notion in Portland, Oregon.
I've just been there. I've just drunk their beer as well.
Juice Junior.
It's off the scale.
So we had this beer as one of the beers, which was a very good example of a New England IPA.
Yeah.
The beer, Juice Junior, and it was, when you've been drinking a beer a long time, sometimes it takes a while before you have that moment where you're like, whoa, like, and I drank it and I was like, that is absolutely incredible. How have they done that?
Yeah, a pretty similar reaction to me actually. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible.
I think it's a single hop, Mosaic only, and the peaches and apricots that come off are absolutely phenomenal. Anyway, I drank this beer and I made a note of it. And one of my sayings is really, you don't ask, you don't get. And I went online and I just went to the website and emailed them and said, hey, this is one of the best New Englands I've ever had. I would love it if you can divulge a few of your secrets on how you've made the beer, because it's excellent and I'd love to be able to try and brew it myself. And they came back and just said, no problem, mate. Basically, we'd love to, if we help you with the recipe, then we can ensure there's less crap beer in the world. So we'd love, and they basically just sent me the whole recipe.
Wow.
But I took that recipe and some of the key points out of it, which are adding tons of maltodextrin for body, a fluffy mouthfeel. Dry hop temperature is important, so you can ensure that hop creep gets out the way before you package it, and also the malt bill as well. So there's a lot of people brewing New England IPAs will know you've got to have 30 to 40% oats and wheat. One thing I'd been playing around with at the same time was golden naked oats, which you can get from Simpson, and they're the only oats you can get which are slightly roasted, and they give this sort of cereal bar sweet flavour. So I was using that a lot in my hazy IPAs. So I combined the knowledge from Great Notion, the hopping schedule, the maltodextrin, and made a beer with a different hop combo which I've been experimenting with. So it's a new hop Nectaron from New Zealand, Nelson, which is just a fantastic hop, and then the original hop in Great Notion, which the Juice Junior, which was Mosaic, and then also some Idaho 7. And that hop combo there, you've just got such a variety of flavors from the hops. And I did it just for fun, brewed it, and I on the test kit, on the pilot kit. And once I'd kegged it and took the first drink, I was just like, that is really delicious. So decided to use that. I always focus on a special or a beer at the different beer events we do, whether that be London Beer Competition or Brew London. And so this year at Brew London, we brewed that beer for Brew London so that it could be the showcase. And luckily for me, the Sainsbury's buyers came by the stand, tried the beer, and I felt pretty awesome because they tried it and afterwards said that was one of the best beers we had at the festival. And I sort of said to myself, wow, if that's not a buying signal, I don't know what is. And then obviously conversations went on after that, and here we are, and it's really pleased to see it's going into stores this October.
You make your own luck, Jacob.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, Jacob, we're brewing on a Braumeister today. This is the workhorse, the test bed.
Yeah, this is the pilot kit. This is where all the recipe development happens. I guess rewinding a little bit, I was on a brew in the bag setup, and actually that's where I developed Everyday Pale Ale, the first beer I had with plastic fermenters. And as I started to bring out more beers, I realised I needed to make sure the pilot kit and the test recipes were as consistent as possible. So managed to get my hands on a second-hand Braumeister, also upgraded my kit to a Firmzilla so I could pressure ferment, and started doing closed loop transfers. So
we're learning more and more about keeping oxygen out of the beer production process and just how important that is and what it does to the final product.
Exactly, and actually it was when I started developing my lager, which was the second beer I released, and that's when it really started showing that I needed to up my game in terms of oxygen ingress and quality control, because I was brewing with plastic fermenters, and with a hoppy pale there's a lot to hide behind in terms of other flavours, and some of the things which are creeping in there from oxygen ingress, acetaldehyde, diacetyl, say apiliness from acetaldehyde, can sometimes just work quite well with a fruity hop bill. So anyway, at that point I realised I needed to cut down improve my kit so I could make sure I was letting as little oxygen into the final product as possible. And as I'm sure you know, there's nowhere to hide on a lager.
Oh, definitely,
So that kind of brought that issue to the forefront.
Jacob, we've just got a couple of minutes before the end of boil where we're going to carry out whirlpool and the rest of that. But just before that, what's your approach to actually crafting a recipe? I think it comes from, again, it goes back to my love of cooking and the way I approach making a recipe, or even as simple as like a tomato sauce. When you finish that off and you have a little taste, it often needs balancing, whether that's a bit of red wine vinegar, a bit of sugar, some salt, essentially so that when you have a mouthful of that, you want to come back for another one straight away. And that's no different with beer. You've got to balance the end sweetness with the bitterness, with the carbonation, with the mouthfeel. It's all got to work in harmony so that once you've had a swig, you want to come back for the rest of that pint and more pints after that. Bringing it back to actually developing a beer recipe, it's often an iterative process for me, as I have an idea in my head of where I want the beer to land, and I'll brew it and then try it, and there'll be things which aren't quite right and I'll adjust it. Skills learned in homebrewing are massively important in doing that process. Yes, and from the judging as well, is just being able to smell something and pick out the nuance in the difference between, say, toffee and dried fruit, or
dark chocolate and cocoa and things like that.
Yeah, nice. We're drinking one of your beers now, which actually is a 3.4% beer, but drinking way bigger. I'm really interested on how you get that mouthfeel and body into that.
Yeah, so lower ABV beers is where Jiddler'S Tipple started. Like I said, I started brewing high gravity beers and wanted to rein it in so I could essentially extend the party. I looked into lots of different ways of keeping the body and the balance and the flavour in a beer that's lower in alcohol. And there's a few ways I've found of doing it. With this one, it's actually it's a toned down version of a Pacific IPA. We did a collab with By the Horns.
Yeah.
And that one is 5%, and wanted to try brewing it at 3.4. Now, the four main ways of helping keep that flavour and body are probably the first one is the kind of malt you're using more complex malts, more roasted malts, and also malts with higher proteins. So there's a lot of wheat and oats in that. There's a lot of dextrin malt, but also you can kind of do, I guess, a modern day cheat, because malted dextrin wasn't available 100 years ago.
Yeah, sure.
It's just, you can chuck pure malted dextrin in there, which are unfermentable sugars, and it just keeps a lot of the body there. There's another one which is yeast. You can use yeasts which don't attenuate as much, so they are also not fermenting as many of the sugars. You can play around with water chemistry. So with the Nimbus, one of the things which adds to the fluffy, full-bodied mouthfeel is having a very high chloride to sulfate ratio.
Okay.
In that case of that, I think chloride's kind of 200 parts per million, sulfate's only 50, so it's a 4:1 ratio. Switch that around and do a 4:1 sulfate to chloride ratio. That's a lot more akin to a classic West Coast or a Burton IPA.
With a much drier.
Exactly, a drier, crisper finish, which also helps accentuate the bitterness. The fourth one, which is also a way of helping increase the number of unfermentable sugars, is raising the mash temperature.
This is something, actually, raising the mash temperature, this is something that we've been talking about with other breweries as well. And, you know, this 72 mash temp on small beers and on big beers as well, where you want a massive amount of mouthfeel, is really working for a lot of breweries now.
Absolutely. So that's actually the ding for the whirlpool. So we'll attend to that in a second. But you're absolutely right. So that's mashed at 70. You know, it's very alpha amylase is much more active. Beta amylase not so active, which means you're creating longer chain sugars off the proteins, which
more difficult to break down.
Exactly. Yeah. So you then end with a beer which is much less easily fermented by the yeast and has more body.
Yeah, nice. Jacob, the Braumeister's shouting at us. Let's get cracking on.
Let's get those hops in there.
Jacob, we've had a fantastically fun day here, home brewing with you. It's been brilliant. The brew's done. It's tucked away in your fermentation fridge. We're going to hot foot it now back to Malt Miller. We're brewing our own version, and we're going to bring it when we meet in a couple of weeks' time so that we can compare.
Right, well, competition's on. I hope you're going to be wearing your best brewing hat, my friend.
I will be, can't wait.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And make sure you look out for Nimbus on Sainsbury's shelves in the next coming weeks.
Can't wait.